nerds, what's up? So, I've been a well-documented Sanderson fan for over a decade now, but my recent obsession with A Song of Ice and Fire has been unexpected, intense, and swift. In fact, surprising everyone, myself most of all, A Song of Ice and Fire has catapulted into my second favorite series of all time, something which I honestly never expected. That means that my top two series of all time are the Stormlight Archive and A Song of Ice and Fire. Now, if I disappear after this video, you'll know why. Because apparently, you are not allowed to say that sort of thing on the internet. Did you know you're not actually allowed to like Sanderson and Martin together? They are actually diametrically opposed, supposedly. Despite the fact that I know that in many fandoms, fans will be like, oh, if you like this, you can't like this, or it's ruined for all time. I do find in my videos that for whatever reason, these two fandoms seem to be at odds more often than others, where Sanderson fans complain that Martin is too depressing and that look at how many books our author has finished in the same amount of time Martin has, where the other side is like, Sanderson can't write prose and his stuff is too happy-go-lucky. Well, recently I have been in the Stormlight Archive for the first time since reading A Song of Ice and Fire because I am working on a recap video of the first 4 books in prep for the 5th book to come out, which is coming out in December. And while doing this, I kept having this thought, a heretical thought. I started to notice similarities, and I realized that for me, I think I like Martin and Sanderson for the exact same reason. They may come at it from different angles. They may have different writing and world building styles, but ultimately, Martin and Sanderson both deeply like exploring characters who are in very difficult situations. Their specific character work and how good they are at subverting reader expectations for character arcs are the reason I think those two series stand out to me, specifically as a character-forward reader. So before we jump into details with that today and explore that a little more, I do want to say 2 important things. The first is that Sanderson and Martin have written my 2 favorite series, so I'm not super interested in you just trashing either author in my comment section. You are free to dislike them, but unless it's like a thoughtful criticism or a thoughtful response, I'm probably gonna ignore you. I'm sorry. The second being spoiler warnings. So I am doing my best to keep this video completely spoiler-free, and I consider the characters and the things I'm going to talk about to be extremely spoiler light, as the things I'm talking about happen either within the first few chapters of the first book or are general character arcs that I don't think really affect your reading. That being said, if you are known to be incredibly spoiler adverse, like you don't want to know anything going in, I would recommend that you have read to book 3 of both series. So that's A Storm of Swords for the A Song of Ice and Fire, and that is Oathbringer for Stormlight Archive. With that being said, I'll see you after the jump. So one of the biggest things I've noticed as a reader of these 2 authors is I feel that people often over-exaggerate George's nihilism and also over-exaggerate Sanderson's squeaky cleanliness. None of that is actually more apparent for me than when reading A Feast for Crows and Oathbringer. In the former, I feel like there is a lot of very hopeful character arcs in that novel and some very touching, hopeful scenes that to me point to the fact that George's series aren't meant to be some sort of punishment or some sort of exercise in misery. And with the latter, I feel like Oathbringer has some extremely, extremely dark and intense scenes that people tend to just write away because they aren't explained super graphically. That is a key element, I think, to this discussion because it automatically sets up Martin and Sanderson as these opposite writers or on opposite scales when I don't actually think it is that black and white. Certainly, Martin leans more into the gray grimness of humanity, whereas Sanderson favors leaning in to more classic heroic tales. However, just like with most writing, I don't think they fit into like these clean lines and often overlap into each other's realms. And 2 characters I just could not get out of my head to compare are actually Jaime Lannister and Dalinar Kholin. I actually think that Martin and Sanderson do the exact same thing with these two characters, albeit they go it from the exact opposite direction. First, let's start with Jaime Lannister. We are introduced to Jaime in a pretty bombastic way. His nickname is the King Slayer. He's in an incestuous relationship, and without saying spoilers, he does something within the first few chapters that makes quite a big impression in a negative way. Now, actually going into reading A Game of Thrones, I knew that Jaime Lannister was two of my friends' favorite character, and as I kept reading the books, I was so excited to be the naysayer, to be the one who was like, I still hate Jaime. He's not a good person. I don't like him. I couldn't wait to prove them wrong because I was positive that I would hate Jaime forever. When I got to that Jaime chapter in Dance and I was so happy, I was like, oh, you are my favorite character. The thing is, suddenly we get to book 3, A Storm of Swords, and for the first time we are in Jaime's head as he is a new POV character. And it's not like the events haven't happened, but suddenly we see them from Jaime's perspective, and Martin is just able to inject such an empathy in there, such a twisting of all these events we thought we knew. Martin brings us intense humanity to Jaime, and suddenly we are seeing these same events not as an outsider, not with preconceived judgments from the eyes of others, but actually from Jaime's head and what he was thinking and outside circumstances that outsiders may not have known. Once again, it doesn't change the actions, but it brings an intense humanity to them. And at least for me, it was impossible to ignore this, and I could not help loving Jaime and his character arc and who he represented within the story. And this was obviously extremely purposeful. Martin uses this technique a lot, although for me personally, it worked to greatest effect with Jaime. Martin is always playing around with how we view characters and their actions before getting into their heads, and it can be from different directions. Sometimes it's when we get into their head, we view them or esteem them better, and other times we get into their head and decide we don't like them as much as we thought we did. In life, we as individuals usually view ourselves as the heroes of our own story, and even when perhaps we know we have been the villain, we think that we made the best choices we could have in our circumstances. And Martin hits on this so excellently and nowhere better, in my opinion, than with Jaime. And this intensely relatable feeling is just, I think, what makes all of Martin's characters so good, and just Jaime's so good. It's what makes Martin so good at characterization. Now let's go look at the Stormlight Archive, and particularly Dalinar Kholin. When we start the Stormlight Archive, Dalinar is good. He is this like heroic character that we really stand behind, that we believe is really trying to do the right thing. Sure, there's stuff alluded to in his past, but I feel like it's pretty easy to ignore, and you're kind of like, yeah, it's probably just like the folly of youth. In fact, there's a moment with Dalinar at the end of The Way of Kings, book 1, that more than any other scene in that book, I know has brought people to tears because of how good and amazing and stalwart Dalinar is. He's just the good guy. Now, ironically, in book 3, just like with A Song of Ice and Fire, in Oathbringer, we get a different view of Dalinar as we actually get a peek into his past. It is the exact opposite with Jaime, that instead of starting with a character we view as bad and then viewing them more complicatedly, we start with a character we view as pretty uncomplicatedly good, and then here's some things that make us have to reckon with that idea. Sure, we don't see him through others' eyes, it's through his own POV, so it's not a perfect one-to-one, but we do see how his very disturbing actions have affected others quite greatly. And how do we reconcile these two seemingly different men? How do we reconcile how we felt about Dalinar in the 2 books to how we feel about him now? In the same way with Jaime, we may have to try to remind ourselves what, like, the person they were in book 1. With Jaime, we might be trying to remind ourselves of the bad things, but with Dalinar, we're trying to remember, hey, wait a second, no, this stuff doesn't matter, right? Because we saw what he was now. That's who he quote unquote is now, and that's all that matters, right? It's that he changed. We have to have this different kind of empathy, this empathy that people truly and really can change from almost anything, and I think it is an intensely relatable feeling, either from the perspective that maybe in your life you've had to do a lot of forgiving for somebody who has harmed you, or you yourself have been the harmer or done things that you're really not proud of and are trying to move on. Sanderson and Martin use the same tool to increase reader empathy and also increase the struggles of their characters. What's fascinating to me about the Dalinar-Jaime comparison is I truly believe either one of those characters the other author could have written. I feel like Dalinar would be at home in Westeros, and I feel like Jaime would definitely be at home in the Stormlight Archive with all of the characters there. Certainly, I think they would come at it slightly differently. For example, if Jaime was in the Stormlight Archive, I don't think I'd have a question about where his arc was ultimately going to end up because of Sanderson's natural inclination for heroic endings. Whereas if Dalinar was in A Song of Ice and Fire, I think George would probably lean in more to how his past affected his present, particularly, I think, for some reason, with his children, and how he was in the past would have affected his children in the present, and maybe like a deeper or darker storyline there. But otherwise, I could honestly see their storylines working in either novel. That said, these characters aren't the only time I could compare character arcs or struggles. Martin and Sanderson in these two series both explore characters who really frustrate us, characters who try again and again to overcome things and can't always quite make it fully, characters we strongly dislike but may be forced to see through a new lens, extremely complicated villains. Before you guys come for me, I do not think any of those characters I flashed on the screen together are similar characters. Rather, I just think Martin and Sanderson are able to elicit similar emotions through those characters that represent very common human experiences. Ultimately, despite on the surface, Martin and Sanderson being extremely different authors, I think the ways that they are similar are the reasons that they are my two favorite authors, and that is that they can just deeply get to the heart of people and human nature through their incredibly detailed and emotionally effective character work. And that's why I think I know I will be coming back to those two series over and over and over again, because they are good at getting to the heart of the human condition. So that's all I've got to say for you today, just a little short comparison. I'd love to know your thoughts on this, particularly if you have read both A Song of Ice and Fire and the Stormlight Archive. And if you are a dual Sanderson Martin fan, please come and join me in the comments. Let's make an army of us. Of course, I understand that not everyone's gonna be a fan of either author, and I'm not saying that that is not perfectly fine or normal even, but this was just a comparison I noticed and felt like I had to talk about. So as always, if you like these kind of deep dives, please like and subscribe. That is the best way to support me. And if you want to see what I'm currently reading as well as other nerdy rants, you can check me out on Instagram at bookborn.reviews. I'll see you next time. Bye.